Well, greetings, imagination connoisseurs. Once again, it is I, your Duke of Dope Discourse, your Viceroy of Verisimilitude, your Master of Fun and Wonder, your Chancellor of Cheerfulness, and your Archbishop of Banterbury, and your existential Mr. Rogers, Robert Meyer Burnett. And I am, of course, Robcasting to you, you members of this, the Post-Geek Singularity community, with episode number 377 of Robservations, the show about something. It's another week, another Monday, and I really have appreciated everybody that has written to me and thanked me for keeping up these shows. It's been fun. It's been a little wacky at the old household here with Elizabeth getting a little weird about the whole coronavirus thing, but she's keeping the family happy. She's keeping us safe, and that's a good thing. So I can't complain. But anyway, it's good to be here doing another show on a Monday. We are rapidly approaching number 400, which I can't even believe. I can't even believe 400 shows, and the only reason that's possible is because you members of this, you imagination connoisseurs of the Post-Geek Singularity, you're the reason I do this. You keep me going, and I very much appreciate that. And once again, I was looking into a subject for today's show, and I have to say, it's getting rougher and rougher every day to find something that I should talk about. I mean, I could just read letters and talk to you guys, but I do feel that it is called Robservations, so I should bring something to the party, something I'm either thinking about or wondering about or something that's occupying my time to make the show at least worth your while. I love your letters, and it makes the feedback is what the show evolved into, and I love that, but I do feel I should bring you guys something. Well, today, what is today? Today is March 30th, 2020 is actually the 30th anniversary to the day of the very first Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles feature film, live action feature film. The Heroes on the Half Shell debuted in theaters 30 years ago today. And I'll flat out tell you, not the biggest Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles fan in the world, but I've appreciated the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles because of something that happened, because of how I've always felt about them, and we're going to talk about that, and I will get into that. But first, I wanted to address some internal matters here with the Post-Geek Singularity community. As many people know, one of our great members, Paul from Long Beach, who I love, and he's written me a lot of funny letters, expressed his discontent with me, and I really was at a loss as to why. So I wrote him, and I said, what's up? And he was concerned and expressed his discontent that he wrote a letter to me and that I had yet to share it with the Post-Geek Singularity community, and wondered if it was something personal or a slight on his part or to me towards him. And I have to say, no, that wasn't the case. And until this morning, where I did a little bit of digging, I didn't understand. I've always loved Paul's letters, and I don't know why I wouldn't read one. Now, let me explain something. If there's something wrong with the Post-Geek Singularity, or I have upset you in any way, or if I've said something remotely offensive, Khalid sent me a really interesting long-form letter about Islam, which I don't know if I could really get into on this show, but it's fascinating reading. But if you have a problem, the buck does stop with me. It is if you have an issue with me, a personal issue, or something I've said or didn't say or didn't read, please write me directly. You can DM me on Twitter. I leave my DMs open, Burnett RM. You can find me on Facebook, or you can send me letters to the show. Now, let me just quickly explain. When you guys send me letters here at the Burnettwork, what I do, Mike goes through those things at first, and then he puts them up on the website. He kind of runs the website. He's not only a moderator, but he's the webmaster. Well, he is the mayor of a modern, small American town, and his town has been dealing with a lot lately. Floods. He's been dealing with personnel. He's been dealing with the coronavirus outbreak. He's been dealing with a lot. So we're not necessarily Johnny on the spot when it comes to letters. And what Mike has been doing is he's either been sending me a flurry of uncurated letters, and that's what I've been getting from him, which is great because he's so busy. The fact that he can get them to me at all is a good thing. Well, so I've been looking out for those letters. I, too, get a lot of emails all day. I'm working on a project. I've got emails about those things, actually numbers of projects. So I get a lot of emails a day. Well, 5 days ago, Mike did specifically sent me a single letter that I missed because his name comes up where he's sending me from so often that it is possible for me not to see something. And after finding out what the deal was, I looked into it, and Mike did indeed, as was requested of him, he sent me this letter in its own email. I just didn't see it. And that is the absolute truth. And I have no problem sharing it, but I'm going to share it right now with you guys. This comes from Paul in Long Beach, and it was written last Wednesday, so 5 days ago, or 6 days ago on the 25th. And it was in reference to our own Jacob Fudge's comic book store. And I thought this was a pretty great letter, and I'm going to share it with you now. He starts out, and he knew that Mike sees the letters first. So he wrote, "Dear Mike, I've never ever asked to have a letter of mine to be placed ahead of the line before until today. This is to be read and not posted on the site. Stay safe, my friend, and keep your community safe as well." So this came from Paul from Long Beach, and Mike did send this to me on the 25th. So he got this from Paul, and Mike forwarded it to me immediately. And I got it at 9:30, 9:30 in the morning on the 25th. So as Paul requested, he sent it to me. And I will read it. "Dear Rob, yesterday's show, number 371, haunted me. Afterwards, I just couldn't get Jacob Fudge out of my head. So I did what he asked me to do, and I sent him a PayPal for a few bucks. Anything to help keep his comic book store open. That being said, I'd like to call on all of our friends in the chat room and the other listeners who don't have a chance to participate in the chat to do what I did and send Jacob a few bucks. If it's $2, $5, $7, anything to help keep this store open would solidify our community as what Rob calls us on a daily basis, imagination connoisseurs. Right now, Robservations is averaging anywhere between 4,000 and 6,000 views a day. If only 10% of that viewership donates $5, we as a group ensure that Jacob's rent gets paid for the next couple of months. That way, Comic Relief Comics not only becomes the official store of the Burnettwork, but the whole of the Post-Geek Singularity as well. At this point, in a weird way, we can all come together to help one of our own because it looks like we all picked the wrong week to stop sniffing glue." Which, by the way, is a line that one of my other favorite YouTubers uses, model building website, and it's a good one. Aztec Modeler. If you want to see great models being built, and he also makes great he makes paint paint patterns if you want to paint these perfect pearlescent thing on your Starship models. But anyway, he says we all picked the wrong week to stop snipping glue at the beginning of all his videos. Anyway, for Jacob Fudge's PayPal address is jake@comicreliefcomics.com. Remember to designate it as sending to a friend. That way Jacob avoids the associated fees. And that comes from Paul in Long Beach. Now, I did not see this. I would have read it. As you know, I've read 2 of Jacob's letters, and I've talked about his comic book store. His comic book store where he moved earlier in 2019 to a new location, and we've sort of been following that. And Comic Relief Comics is the first external part of the Burnettwork. So I wholeheartedly agree, and Jacob has been hand-delivering, driving hundreds of miles to take his customers all over where he lives their comics. And I'm a huge, firm believer in supporting that store and what he's been doing for his community. So once again, jake@comicreliefcomics.com is his email, and it's also his PayPal address. So if you want to support him, he's obviously doing great work for his community, great work as an imagination connoisseur, and I've now shared Paul's letter, which I thought was a very, very good letter. But again, I want to remind everybody that if there's a problem or anybody has a problem with the anything about this show, don't take it up with anybody else. Take it up with me directly, because I can't know what everyone's thinking all the time. You know, I'm here talking at you. I try and converse as much as I can, but if I don't know something that's going on, I can't figure it out. And if somebody says that they're very disappointed in me or whatever, I don't know what that means. So contact me any way you can, and let's nip those things in the bud, because that's, I think, the best way of doing it. And I want to thank Paul in Long Beach for writing this letter of support for Jacob. I absolutely agree. And anybody who's interested in seeing comic book stores endure Jacob Fudge and Comic Relief Comics is right now the single and only official comic book store of the Burnettwork. And I wholeheartedly approve. And in the spirit of comics, I want to talk about the 30th anniversary of the release of the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. Now, there is, of course, wouldn't you know it, an article on the Hollywood Reporter today, and I did want to share that just to get into the subject at first. So here it is, ladies and gentlemen. This was on the Hollywood Reporter today. It's more than childhood nostalgia that makes the comic book movie a favorite decades after its March 30th, 1990 release. COWABUNGA! It's been 30 years since the heroes on the half shell kicked their way onto movie screens, propelling Turtle Mania to the highest highs. Unlike other fads of the late 80s and early 90s that had their brief time in the sun and are now best recalled by their place in BuzzFeed listicles, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles has lived well past its mania. Since their comic book debut in 1984, Kevin Eastman and Peter Laird's ninjutsu practicing reptiles, Leonardo, Donatello, Michelangelo, and Raphael have been present for every generation. Across 6 theatrical films, 5 TV series, an animated crossover with Batman, a bevy of video games, and countless comic book appearances, the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles have embedded themselves into popular culture in a way that few, if any, other independent comics creations have. The style in which they've been depicted may have changed, and their shade of green has varied over the years, but the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles have never found themselves stuck in the sewers for long. But across these generations, there has been a popular unifying opinion. Steve Barron's Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles in 1990, director Steve Barron, is the best on-screen translation of these heroes. It's more than childhood nostalgia that makes Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles such a beloved film. I'll be the first one to admit that my affinity for the property was a defining aspect of my childhood. Though I was born a couple of years too late to experience the peak of Turtle Mania, my late arrival to the property, which came right before the ill-received live-action series Ninja Turtles: The Next Mutation in 1997, was something of a blessing when it came to getting me into the Turtles. To say there was an overstock of Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles merchandise in 1995, following the middling box office of Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles 3, is putting it mildly. KB Toys was a treasure trove for discounted Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle merch, and VHS copies of the memorable animated series could be found anywhere from Dollar General to Burlington Coat Factory. Turtles were cheap and easy to come by, which made them too enticing for a kid with a pocket of allowance money to resist. Before I ever saw Barron's film, I was well acquainted with the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, which added a layer of authenticity to the film when I finally did see it. The mid-90s weren't a haven of comic book films like we have today, and as a kid deemed too young for Tim Burton's Batman, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles was the only film outside of Richard Donner's Superman that gave me a chance to see characters I'd familiarized myself with in cartoons and action figures brought to life. Never one to commit to halfway, I saved my allowance, and with a few extra bucks thrown my way by Dad in support of this endeavor, I bought all 3 Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles movies from Suncoast Video. Compared to Superman, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles was strikingly dark, and I remember thinking at the time that it was what all adult movies must look like. There was a level of horror to the world, at least for someone whose best estimation of horror movies was gathered from VHS box art at Blockbuster. Even revisiting it last weekend for the first time in almost 20 years, I was struck by how grim the film looks. We throw around dark and gritty in response to modern comic book movies all the time now, but Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, a year after Batman, in 1989, went all in on its production design, and in this case, it was New York and not a fictional Gotham City. It's in an NYC that feels lived in, storied, and more than a little greasy, all of which because, it's pizza grease, all of which contributes to the believability of 4 crime-fighting mutant ninja turtles and their master, Splinter, living in the sewers and eating pizza. The believability of the film's world is what made the film work then, and it's why the film has remained so highly regarded among fans and comic book movie connoisseurs 30 years later. Despite a production that was nothing short of a saga, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles feels crafted with care and love as opposed to the cheap cash-in it could have been. Director Barron and screenwriters Todd W. Langan and Bobby Herbeck managed to synthesize aspects of the popular cartoon series, including the Turtles' catchphrases, love of pizza and colored bandanas, along with the darker, more mature elements of Laird and Eastman's comics, which I would not read until over a decade later. The film's tagline, "Hey dude, this is no cartoon," still manages to speak volumes about the intentions of the production. The tone is fun and playful and the story is straightforward, but from the costumes to the performances, there's nothing cartoonish about the film. Leonardo, Brian Toshi, Donatello, Corey Feldman, yes, that's right, Raphael, Josh Pace, Michelangelo, Robbie Rist, was Michelangelo and Splinter, Kevin Cash, aren't lacking in personality, but their traits are measured in such a way that each character feels authentic and like so much more than men in suits and wonders of puppetry. What struck me the most during my rewatch is how committed Judith Hoag, Elias Koteas, and James Sato are in their respective human roles as April O'Neil, Casey Jones, and the Shredder. There's no winking aspect to their performances, no line or look that suggests they would have been anywhere else than where they were. Only a genuine repartee with 5 dudes dressed up in 70-pound Jim Henson costumes. There's a level of thematic maturity in this film, one that's sorely lacking from all the Ninja Turtles movies that followed, despite their varying degrees of enjoyability. As a property primarily aimed at children, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles has always seemed like one of the easiest ones to dismiss by parents and grandparents who didn't grow up with it. Yet the continued existence of these characters and the success of that first film relies on the idea that these silly characters have the capability for depth and emotional resonance. There's a scene early on in the film where Donatello tries to broach the subject of Splinter dying to Michelangelo. Hey, Mikey, did you ever think about what Splinter said tonight? I mean, what would it be like, not having him? Michelangelo offers no response to the question posed and instead comments on the late pizza. There is a fear of loss at the heart of the film, even when it's punctuated by comedy. That fear comes back around later in the film during the retelling of Shredder's origin story, in which he kills the woman he loves because she did not love him in return, and his Foot Clan and the teenage recruits that fill his ranks, whiling away their time on his equivalent of Pleasure Island, are nothing more than lost boys afraid of growing up, and the responsibilities placed upon them by their parents and society. It's heavy stuff for a supposed kids' film, and yet it's that very heft that has allowed the film to stick and stay with us into adulthood. The second act of Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, in which April, Casey, and the Turtles take the injured Raphael to a farmhouse in upstate New York, is such a fascinating departure for a kids' action film to take. Not only do we get to experience the aesthetic contrast of the serenity of nature to the filth in New York City, but we get to see those characters have a transcendental experience, each one processing what they've been through and what they will have to face in their own way. It's these farmhouse scenes that have stuck with me the most following my rewatch, and not to overinflate the importance of the film, but more than the grit and grime of New York, more than the committed performances, and more than the balance of cartoon and comic book influences, it's these farmhouse scenes that I think really gave me the impression as a child that this was what films for adults must be like. In the Turtles' contemplation on brotherhood and what their father means to them, there is an absence of nostalgia, a commitment to be renewed in the service of the future, rather than for the sake of recapturing the past. Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles has been held in such esteem for so long because it's a story about growing up, about teenagers becoming adults, and the stealthily approach in how that theme is handled is nothing short of radical. Well, I thought that was a cool appreciation of the film in the Hollywood Reporter. And once again, I don't know if I mentioned the author of the piece, but it's by Richard Newby, and it was published today at 11 o'clock in the afternoon in the Hollywood Reporter. So it was published a little less than 2 hours ago. I thought I would share that with you because I'll flat out say one of the things in my lifetime that I've been most I don't know if you'd say impressed by, but I've been most interested in watching that I wasn't personally invested in has been the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. And I did see the 1990 movie in the theater, and I was not necessarily a Turtles fan. But what struck me about what happened with Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles is that it didn't really start out this way. The Ninja Turtles started out, as many people know, as a parody comic. And for those who haven't watched the excellent, even if you're not interested in the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, I would recommend watching the episode of The Toys That Made Us about the Ninja Turtles, because I think what's so great about the Ninja Turtles, what's so great about the toys that made us, is that you understand the business of what happened here. You're not just delving into the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles as a toy thing. You really get a sort of an overarching idea of where do they come from, how were they developed as a business, and it really shows how a pop culture property is handled. And I think it's a great show. I mean, even if you're not interested in Barbie, I can't recommend highly enough the episodes of G.I. Joe and Barbie, and you watch how an American, not just American, but companies that are making, whether it's Legos, whether it's Transformers, how they adapt to a ever-changing marketplace, the fickle marketplace of children. And I thought that was always very interesting. But as I remember comic books, the Teenage Mutant Ninja comics debuted in a black and white. I remember it was slightly oversized. I think it was a slightly oversized comic. Maybe I'm wrong, but it was a black and white comic, no color, just newsprint in black and white. And it was released as a parody comic of what was going on in comics at the time. And in '84 was right when I had got into comic books again heavily. I'd come across Camelot 3000, and in '82 and '83, I started to get into comics again. And by 1984, I was ensconced in my comic book obsession, and I was going to the comic book store every week by this point. And when Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles came out, and by the way, it was the beginning, there was like radioactive adolescent black belt hamsters. There was all kinds of parody comics. Because Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, which had a very low print run, which is why the original comics are worth so much money, but it was a parody comic. It heavily leaned into Frank Miller's work, specifically Ronin and his work on Daredevil and the stuff he had done with Elektra and the Hand, ninjas and all of that. And Ronin was, of course, Frank Miller's amazing series, science fiction series about this future with samurais, and it was all very, very interesting. By the way, if you haven't read Ronin, I have it right down there in the absolute version. It's fantastic. I really love Frank Miller's Ronin. It's a great book, but also there was elements of New Mutants and Cerebus, Dave Sim's Cerebus comic, which at the time, another huge comic, and it was very adult. Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles was not for kids. I mean, it was not something that, you'd give to a 10-year-old or an 8-year-old. Not at all. I mean, it was a pretty hardcore, hard-hitting. I mean, it was crazy, and it was created by Kevin Eastman, obviously, and Peter Laird, and their Mirage Studios. And Kevin Eastman later went on and purchased Heavy Metal, and I think he married Julie Strain, and they were involved in the Heavy Metal 2 movie and things like that. But so it started out as this parody comic with these young guys just trying to come up with something that was cool. And what's really interesting, they used their own money, they threw their own money into it, borrowed some money, threw tax refund money into it. And so that was that. But what was really interesting is let me get this straight. They started their rise to mainstream success. Hang on, this is from the Wikipedia page. Mark Friedman sought out Eastman and Laird to propose a wider merchandising opportunity for the franchise. And the first things that were made were Dark Horse miniatures, produced a set of 15 millimeter, 0.6 of an inch lead figurines. That was the first, I guess, to appeal to gamers. And then in January '87, Eastman and Laird went to Playmates Toys. And Playmates Toys at this point, in January of '87, they didn't have the Star Trek license yet. Galoob did. So Playmates Toys did not get a toy license from Star Trek first. It was Eastman and Laird went to Playmates Toys, and they were a small company that wanted to expand into the action figure market. And so obviously they did. And that... So the toys and the animated show were basically they were developed kind of at the same time, and they became and of course they had to make it sort of kid friendly, so they came up with ideas for the toys and how it would all work and what kind of stories they were going to say or use and how they were going to do it, and their catchphrases, battle cries, Heroes in the Half Shell and Turtle Power. And so you had the toy team and an animation team conceptualizing, and then they were still publishing their original comic. So it's pretty fascinating how this comic that began as a fairly adult-oriented, well, it was adult-oriented, parody of what was going on in the comic book industry, in the indie comic book industry, and because Sienkiewicz had gone over to things like New Mutants. Very, very interesting development process, and how something that wasn't necessarily directed at kids sort of was co-opted by a toy company and then animation studios, and of course it exploded and became the thing that, 30 years later, we're obviously still talking about the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles franchise and movies. And I was always fascinated from that perspective. I was never, I think by the time the toys hit, it was, for me, I'm like, it wasn't my thing. Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles weren't my thing, and I still thought of it as a parody comic. And I thought it was strange. I thought it was strange that this children's juggernaut between the animated series and the toys became this kids thing, because to me, I'm like, this is a parody of Dave Sim's Cerebus, and Frank Miller's Daredevil work. Who are kids to buy toys? I always thought it was kind of crazy, and I just never got into it. But you couldn't help but recognize how huge it became. It was huge. In the early 90s, it was huge, huge, huge. And of course, I think the success that Playmates had with those toys allowed them to get the license after Galoob kind of dropped the ball with Next Generation. And the Playmates, they did such a wonderful job for a very long time with the Star Trek license. And I have a lot of their toys, and I'll always, I think that Star Trek has never been treated better by a toy company than Playmates did. You could go on and say Diamond Select did a good job, and they did. I really appreciate their bigger figures, and I did appreciate the idea that they'd created ships and everything. But Playmates really, they had a perfect balance of making toys that were actually family-friendly, appealed to kids, but also to older collectors like myself. So it was a pretty amazing time watching this happen. And it was strange to see how something that was designed and written for more of an adult audience was totally turned into this beloved children's franchise, something that started out life as a parody of something else. And I find that fascinating and absolutely worth celebrating. So it was amazing to me watching it explode. And I really did like the first Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles movie. I really enjoyed it. Did I find that it had a lot of verisimilitude? Well, no. The guys in suits, the big guys in suits, I like what they did, though. I like the design, and like the author of the article says, it was a film that it had value. And I still think to this day, is it a great adaptation of the original comic books? No. And I think what's been sort of interesting is they try and make it appeal more like the new Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle movies. They're trying to appeal to an older audience, but they sort of have lost the charm of what made the Ninja Turtles popular to begin with. And, I feel like this happens to a lot of franchises, Star Trek being another. They want to make everything cool for modern audiences. But what was interesting about the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles as a parody, the original comic, was it began life as something that was very cool. Then it got turned into this kids franchise, which also in itself was pretty cool. And then to come back, obviously kids are different 30 years ago than today. They're different in some ways and kind of the same in the others. And I see that the franchise, there's still the same thing with He-Man. It was really of its time, and there's been cool things like they've grown up and made He-Man, the collector's statues or the collector's figures they've been really cool. But I don't know if you could ever recapture what Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles did capture. I think children's franchises more than ever, they don't last as long as you would like them to, and they get replaced. And you look at what's great about the toys that made us is you can look at both what happened to He-Man, and you can look at what happened with Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, and they peaked and then they kind of petered out, and they still bubble along. And then as kids get older and there's nostalgia, you can reinvent the toy franchise. But I don't know if you can ever capture those zeitgeist moments again. And people would say, well, Rob, what about Star Trek? But Star Trek has sort of been reinventing itself as it went along, so it's a little different than Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. And to me, the kidification of the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles was its sort of reinvention, and it was something that happened when it began as this very funny and very witty parody and very adult-minded parody of Frank Miller and Cerebus and all that. I mean, it was a really interesting thing to observe, and by then, by 1990, I was already in my early 20s, and it was still, while I liked that first movie, and it was, I mean, when it came out, it was a big deal. I just wasn't a fan. I wasn't obviously watching the animation, and I wasn't even collecting the toys. Although, truth be told, I've seen a lot of Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle toys lately that I feel I should own them because they are pop culture icons. But then again, they weren't my pop culture icons. So it'd be like me trying to explain to a kid today how cool the Eagle transporter from Space 1999, how cool it actually is. If you didn't grow up with it, you could look at it and go, okay, that's cool. But if you were to go back and watch Space 1999 episodes and watch the Eagles, I don't know if you would possibly think they're as cool as anybody who was, say, 8 years old when they first started playing with their Dinky Eagles. Dinky was a toy company that came out of England. Their die-cast metal Dinky. I don't know if it would mean the same thing to anybody. But I just thought it was interesting that today it came up that, hey, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, the movie, turned 30 years old today. And I'm like, my God. That's strange to think that Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles have been around for more than half my lifetime. And that's pretty crazy to me. And they were around as that parody comic, the original comic, the adult comic before that movie came out. They were 1984. I mean, that's crazy to think it goes back that far, because Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles is something that sort of really caught on in what I would consider to be my adult life. But anyway, when I read that today, I thought it was worth sharing, and I thought it was kind of fun to go back, because I know a lot of my viewership did grow up with the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles and did like the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles and did collect their toys and figures. So I thought that was kind of a fun topic, a fun to reinvent it for the modern age. And I would say it definitely is, certainly between the animated franchise and the animated episodes and then the movies that have come out, it's certainly, they're trying to keep it a viable entertainment media. It's still out there in the world, and it's undergone the later movies, the ones that we've seen most recently that Michael Bay producing, to see them, they want to sort of bring back, it's like going back to Star Trek or, going back to Doctor Who. I really liked the revival in 2005 when Eccleston was made Doctor Who, and I thought that was interesting. YouTube is not receiving enough video to maintain smooth streaming, it says. I don't know why that is, considering nothing has changed in how I've been streaming. So all I can do is keep going. I'll just keep going and soldier through. Hopefully the show will keep going. But anyway, let me put on my glasses and cut to where you guys are throwing in some chats here. And let me jump back to Willow. Willow says, okay, which member of the writing staff hired for season 7 of TNG is the Worf Troy shipper? Parallels, Eye of the Beholder, and now Genesis. I'm starting to see a pattern. Well, Willow, look no further than Mr. Brannon Braga. Brannon Braga, who went on and, of course, wrote Star Trek Generations and all of those things. He wrote Parallels, Eye of the Beholder, Renee Echeverria wrote, but I think he came up with the story, and Genesis he wrote as well. So I think he admits in our documentaries that probably wasn't the best thing in the world to do, that the Worf romance didn't work as well as certain people might have hoped. So who knows? I would blame Brannon Braga. I'm hoping that you guys are still seeing me. Let's hope that you guys are. I don't know if you are, but I would assume you are. think I'm broadcasting, but I keep getting this error message. But it looks like I'm still going. We'll see. Anyway, John Ortiz sends in a tip and says, "Hey Rob, I have a Moat in God's Eye story for you. A Moat in God's Eye is one of the collaborations between Larry Niven and Jerry Pournelle that I was talking about on yesterday's show. Obviously, they wrote Footfall and they wrote the Lucifer's Hammer, which I read in the sixth grade, and that was one of my favorite collaborations between two authors that I've read, and I was asked about that yesterday. Hey Rob, I have a Moat in God's Eye story for you. I met the editor at the bookstore I was managing in the 1990s. Bob Gleason said a sequel is forthcoming. The Gripping Hand. Wow, I've never read that. Didn't like it as much. Moat is my favorite. Is Pearl in the Robservatory? John, it's funny that you should say that. I used to just broadcast this show basically out of my laundry room. That was where Robservations was coming from. I had my desk there. I had my editorial things there. And I'd wanted to move into what I was calling at the time the Imaginarium. It just took a while. So I have moved out, but there are some things that were left behind. And I've been slowly moving those into the Robservatory. And Pearl is here. And I don't know, for those of you new subscribers or people wondering, well, what is Pearl? Pearl is a 1-to-1 scale alien bust that I bought for the old Ludovico offices in 2004. And Pearl weighs about 40 pounds, and I have her here. For those of you who would like to see Pearl, I guess here you're going to have to bear with me while I get Pearl here. Pearl is extremely heavy. This is Pearl. You can kind of see how big Pearl is. This is Pearl's back. Let me pull Pearl's front. Pearl is extremely heavy. And there it is. There's Pearl. And I'll put this up. I forget what company made this, like Hollywood Props or something. So you can kind of see there's the alien head. There's more detail. This thing is huge and heavy. So let me set Pearl down. It's really, really heavy and cumbersome to pick up. So there you go, ladies and gentlemen. There is Pearl. Pearl is here. And I love that we have people asking about various members of the Post-Geek Singularity that exist here in the Robservatory. So there you go. Midnight's Edge After Dark sent in a super chat and said, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles 90 is probably my favorite film of all time. Well, then, I am happy that I've made that the subject of today's Robservations, which is a lot of fun. I'm glad you guys are digging it. Abram Treadwell sent in a super chat and says, big fan since Heroes. Keep kicking out the jams, RMB. I was 6 when Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles came out. Saw it in the theater 3 times. How time flies. I know, man. How time flies. That's crazy. I can't believe 1990. It's weird. When I think about 1990, I was working at Warner Brothers. That was so long ago. My God. Crazy. Mukbang Reviews sends in a super chat and says, I love the dialogue in All About Eve. I can't wait to hear you and Elizabeth talk about it. Monroe's cameo is a treat. Well, I don't know if we will ever talk about it. Tonight's movie is Double Indemnity. I think I already showed her All About Eve and Sunset Boulevard, 2 movies I love. One's about movies and one's about the theater, but we should. Tonight's Elizaviews is about Billy Wilder's 1944 film noir that's one of the best film noirs ever made, Double Indemnity, with Barbara Stanwyck and Fred McMurray, and boy, is it great. And Edward G. Robinson, what a movie. What dialogue. Oh, so, yeah. Journey's End sends in a super chat and says, my first memory is being in preschool and a friend's dad worked for Jim Henson when the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle movies came out. So he brought the Raphael costume into our preschool and put it on to show us how it worked. Oh my God, how cool would that have been? That would have been amazing. That would have been amazing. I love that. Crazy. That's amazing. Chairman Mao sends in a tip and says, my cousin Francis's greatest comic book claim to fame was drawing a Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles story called Apparition in Turtle Soup #1. Here is the link to the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles Pedia article. All right, I will put this in the chat. I will put this in the live chat so you too can find this particular link to Chairman Mao's cousin Francis's comic. Here it is. So, there you go. Check that out. So, here we go. Dancing Dog sends in a tip and says, Robert, interesting that you mentioned the Eagle from Space 1999. I go back to the Jupiter 2 from Lost in Space and the amazing flying sub from Voyage to the Bottom of the Sea. I'm sure kids today would think that those spaceships look pretty goofy, crazy. Well, first of all, Dancing Dog, no. The flying sub from Voyage to the Bottom of the Sea is by far one of the coolest flying machines ever depicted in any movie ever or TV show. I think was it in the feature? Was it in the 20th Voyage to the Bottom of the Sea feature, or was it only in the show? I think it was only in the show. I love the flying sub. I think it's gorgeous, and Polar Lights did an unbelievable model of it, much bigger than the old Aurora kit. Really, really incredible. And here's I can tell you this. So yes, as people know, I'm friends with Bryan Singer. Bryan Singer bought at auction the original Jupiter 2 model this year. Yes, sir. True story. Bryan Singer bought the original Jupiter 2 model, which I told him he has to make sure, like, get it refurbished. So when you have it on display at your house, you have it plugged in so you can see it work. But I love the Jupiter 2. I think it's a great spaceship. And again, Polar Lights makes a great kit of it, and you get the lighting kit. The key to the Jupiter 2 is the spinning lights in the engine in the bottom. I love the Jupiter 2. I think it's great. So yeah, I think absolutely it's good stuff. So no, I think the flying sub, I'm right there with you, because it was for me it was kind of the same time I was watching Voyage to the Bottom of the Sea, and I loved when the flying sub took off. It's really such a beautiful design, because obviously it's like a manta ray that flies, and I thought that they really did the flying sub. You actually believed, because it's also kind of the whole thing is a wing. You believe it. I believed in the flying sub even as a kid. The yellow and blue, the interior was so cool. Yeah, I loved it. During these days where I feel sequestered, Dancing Dog goes on to say, during these days where I feel sequestered, I've been watching Turner Classic Movies. I encourage all of the fans of your amazing show to give it a shot. I imagine your audience may be 20-somethings and need to be reminded there were films before 1980. It's interesting that you say that, Dancing Dog. I agree. I think everybody needs to get in there and watch classic films, and TCM is great. I will tell you exactly, one of the great things about YouTube is you can read your own analytics about your audience. Your analytics, you can actually see them, and I will tell you exactly the age group of who watches this show. My primary audience is between 18 to 64. And if you want to know, according as of the last 28 days, my audience, there used to be people from 13 to 17 years old, but over the last 28 days, that has it's 0%. So 18 to 24 is 4.9% of my audience. 25 to 34 is 22.3% of the audience. And my biggest group of audience members are 35 to 44 years old. That makes up 37.3% of the audience. 45 to 54 makes up 20% of the audience. 27% of the audience. And 55 to 64 make up 6.6% of my audience. So if you can see it on my phone, it's almost like a perfect curve. I wonder if you can see that. The audience there, how it's a perfect, like, right there. And I find it interesting, like on the two ends of the spectrum, 4.9% between 18 to 24 and 6.6% 55 to 64. And then it's right in the middle. My biggest audience at 37.3 is 35 to 44 years of age, which I think is pretty interesting, especially if you look at the demographics of when things came to pass. I just find it really interesting in terms of being a member of the Post-Geek Singularity. So with my 37.3% of audience members being between 35 and 44, if you want to go back and if you think about it, Star Wars is 43 years old this year. So imagination connoisseurs that make up my biggest audience probably saw Star Wars for the first time when Return of the Jedi came out. And if Return of the Jedi was your first Star Wars movie, that probably would solidify in your mind all genre material, science fiction, fantasy, horror. You became an imagination connoisseur at a sweet, that sweet spot, because you'd be able, as you got older, if you saw Return of the Jedi and that was your gateway drug, you had 2 more Star Wars movies to find. You had Superman the movie to find. You had all those crazy horror movies to find, whether it was Phantasm or Dawn of the Dead. And then you ended up getting everything in between: Superman 2, Star Trek the Motion Picture, Alien, The Black Hole, then Wrath of Khan. And it was... So if Return of the Jedi was your big moment, you were 44 years old, and you saw Return of the Jedi, at 6 or something, and that was your gateway drug, look at what you got to see in your life. And what was already there. Home video was already established, so, your parents could get you things. And it was totally, it's not surprising to me that the sweet spot of my audience, a little older than me, or a little younger than me, but that would be the best time ever, probably, to be a newly minted imagination connoisseur, would be to see Jedi when you're 6 or 7, that being your first Star Wars movie. John Campea talks about how Return of the Jedi is his favorite Star Wars movie because it was probably the first one he saw in the theater. And I can only imagine when you're that age. I was older when I saw the first Star Wars, but if you were 6 or 7 or 8 when you saw Return of the Jedi for the very first time, and that was the first Star Wars movie you ever saw in a theater, that to me would be mind-blowing. It would be mind-blowing to have that. So it's pretty... It doesn't surprise me that 37 to 44 is my primary audience, because those are probably the people that became imagination connoisseurs at the best time to become an imagination connoisseur. So, yeah. So Dancing Dog, I would take Dancing Dog's advice, though, because going back and watching Turner Classic Movies, they do play a lot of science fiction and horror stuff, and there's great stuff there. So definitely, absolutely worth checking out. Do It For Cash sends in a tip and says, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, undoubtedly my first fandom. I can just barely remember being 2 in 1990 and seeing the show called Coming Out of Their Shells at Radio City Music Hall. Still not sure if pizza is my favorite food because of the turtles or because I'm from Flatbush, Brooklyn. I love it. Are you a lord of Flatbush? That's coming out on Blu-ray, by the way. I guess you are. That's amazing to hear, because there was a Broadway show even back then. That's how big what would it, Turtlemania. Turtlemania was sweeping the nation and the world, I guess. Dancing Dog sends in another tip. Thank you, sir. For instance, they were gangster films made before Goodfellas and Scarface. All the early Warner Brothers Bob films are really fantastic. James Cagney, Humphrey Bogart, Edward G. Robinson. Please see those films. Yeah, I was talking about it just yesterday. I was mentioning White Heat as one of the great gangster movies. And Top of the World, Ma. Cody Jarrett and all that. Yes, you got to see all of that. Those are all great movies. There weren't just gangster. The original Scarface. You got to see the original Scarface. You can't watch the old you can watch the new Scarface without seeing the old Scarface. But yes, but Turner Classic Movies just, and what's really interesting about a lot of these older movies, like we were watching Double Indemnity last night because Elizabeth hadn't seen it, and the first 5 minutes, when you first get into the story, when Fred McMurray meets Barbara Stanwyck's character, the banter and the talking between them, it's like, oh my God, we're not in Kansas anymore. And yeah, you've got to go back and watch older films. You really do. And Dancing Dog is right. There's so many great gangster movies made in the 30s and the 40s. Film noir. There's so many great movies. And Turner Classic Movies does play a lot of them. So you can get a really great education if you start being a Turner Classic Movies junkie. Evan Newman sends in a tip and says, fond memories of watching the original Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles movie on VHS with my siblings growing up. It had a dirty, gritty vibe and didn't feel like a kid's movie. The Raphael scenes were kick-ass, and the Pizza Hut commercial at the beginning of the VHS was classic, too. Yeah, that's what the Hollywood Reporter article was pointing out. Obviously, Richard Newby, who wrote that article, was dead on the money. And I think, again, that's why the movie worked. It worked because the people who made the movie really understood what that franchise was all about. And it wasn't pandering. When I grew up, I don't remember movies, like I remember seeing films with kids in them, even Escape to Witch Mountain, which is a favorite, obviously, because Tony and Tia were extraterrestrial kids, and then later in Return to Witch Mountain, extraterrestrial teens. But they didn't pander to kids. And I think that's kind of what's happened with children's entertainment. There's a lot of pandering that goes on, and they've made children's entertainment at the expense of adults. Like, adults in so many children's shows or children's movies these days are kind of idiots. And I've said that's my Bart Simpson theory. Once they made Bart Simpson this, like, smarter than his dad, and you see Homer Simpson as kind of this then it began, every show had to have a Bart Simpson in it. That paradigm became something that has permeated kids programming for the last 30 years. And I think that was actually pretty detrimental, to be honest. And I mean, it's strange for me to say that, but the idea that authority figures and that adults were portrayed as being idiots sort of was a strange thing to me. I never really understood that. What can you do? Jason S. sends in a tip and says, Kevin Eastman will be watching the 1990s Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles movie live, and will be doing a live chat during the movie in like an hour or so. Well, now that you've brought that up, Jason S., I was wondering if anybody did bring that up, because MovieWeb, Kevin Berwick, wrote yesterday that Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles creator wants to stream the original movie with you on Monday. That would be today. Can you believe it has been 30 years since the first live-action Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles movie hit theaters? Many expected the movie to be a quiet flop that Ninja kicked into theaters before cartwheeling out after just one weekend, but a surprising thing happened. The movie was a huge hit, and a big screen franchise was born. Now I'll go back to where it all began, with one of the co-creators of this legendary comic series that spun off into TV shows, movies, books, toys, video games, food, and just about anything else you can imagine. Co-creator of the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, Kevin Eastman, has announced this weekend that he wants to watch the first movie with you all hunkered down in the bunker. Here's what the man had to say to himself, or for himself. This is Kevin Eastman. Grab yourself some pizza and Grab yourself some pizza and a drink and fire up whatever version of the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles movie you have, and let's meet on Monday, March 30th for a party live on Facebook to celebrate the 30th anniversary of the release of the 1990s Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles movie. Let's have fun together, enjoying things we all love while maintaining good social distance practices. The hashtag WatchTMNT with me event sounds pretty exciting. So if you want to find out, it's on Twitter, or the hashtag WatchTMNT with me event sounds pretty exciting. Kevin Eastman has some interesting things planned throughout the rest of 2020 to celebrate the movie, the first of 3 in a trilogy. He recently shined the spotlight on Mark Martin's 1990 parody book, Green Gray Sponge Suit Sushi Turtles. He's showing off art from the book on his homepage. I love this book. Mark Martin, a dear friend, super funny guy, and uber talented artist, did this parody back in 1990 when we were releasing the very first Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles movie. What a way to start the 30th anniversary celebration of the first movie than to have another look, or first-time look, at this awesome, hilarious classic. Over the next few days, Team Eastman will be making these galleries available to you for free viewing and PDF download. These images below will link to the pages for you to access the original book, shorts from Turtle Soup, and the original art from both, Mark's original toy designs, and finally a brand new, never-before-seen 7-page comic midlife burnout sushi turtles, tell all of your friends. From all of us here at Kevin Eastman Studios to all of our dear friends around the world, we hope this message finds you and your loved ones as safe as possible. Our thoughts and most heartfelt well wishes be with you. At our end, we are happy to report that our team and families remain healthy. We thank you for all of your notes of concern and kind words. As we will not get the chance to get back out on the road and see you all in person for a while, we're digging deep into our archives and rolling out a load of free digital downloads and other hidden treasures for anyone who drops by the site. Stay tuned for these editions. For all our current fan club members during these troubled times, we are extending your existing memberships by an extra 3 months as a small thank you for all of your awesome support over the years. We remain open for business via our website. We appreciate you so very much. Keep in touch, but most of all, stay safe out there. Cheers. So there you go. For those of you who want to join, I guess it takes place in an hour. Hashtag Watch Teenage Mutant. Here's the hashtag. Watch TMNT with me. That's the hashtag, and it happens in an hour. So there you go, Jason S. You are correct. And by the way, thanks for supporting the channel. Stubble McShave sent in a $2.13 super chat. I love that. I love those random numbers. It's great when it's foreign currency and stuff. It's fantastic. Stubble says Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles must have info on how to use the seashells. I love the fact that I think one of the great byproducts, at least as far as imagination as far as imagination connoisseurs and members of the Post-Geek Singularity are concerned, I think one of the great funny things is the three seashells, which is, of course, a reference to Demolition Man. And I just think toilet paper, seashells, Demolition Man, hilarious, which is very funny. Magic K sent in a super chat, a $4.99 super chat. Thank you for that. Maybe we can schedule a free Enterprise watch party. Well, it's funny that you say that. I was thinking about calling the Richard to do a live watch party where I would be on the chat and do a free Enterprise watch party. This would be interesting for me because obviously I want to do, for those of you who don't know, I wrote and directed a movie called Free Enterprise that stars Eric McCormack and William Shatner and Rafer Weigel and Audie England and Patrick Van Horn and Phil Lamar. And I've been thinking about doing a watch party because I did a version of Free Enterprise where I repositioned, I made it 2:3:5:1. Free Enterprise was shot 1:8:5, the aspect ratio, but I always wanted it to be widescreen, so I actually recomposed every shot. And I was thinking about, I only have a standard definition version, but I was absolutely thinking about showing the film and showing this new version of the movie that I've been working on. I'm hoping to do a 4K version of it. But if anybody's really interested, I would love to do it as an episode of Whining About Movies, maybe Thursday night. Maybe Thursday night we could do it as a Facebook watch party. I certainly would have no problem doing that. I think I probably should. So I'll talk to the Richard. Maybe we'll do it on the Post-Geek Singularity Facebook page. And I'll invite anybody that wants to, including any members of the, I'll send a message out to all the cast if they want to jump on and do that. I think that would be a lot of fun to see who would actually show up. But we shall see. Yeah. So I think that's a good idea, Magic K. Let's do that. Mark Chure sent in a super chat and says, I was too old for the Turtles, but caught that first CG Turtle show that Nickelodeon did that ended about 3 years ago. I was impressed with how faithful it was to the comics. Yeah, I didn't see much of that. I caught snippets of it, but I've heard that other people really, really dug it. So I think that's really, really cool. Mukbang Reviews sends in a super chat and says, oh my God, you mentioned a favorite, 1975's Escape to Witch Mountain. It's on Disney Plus. Love the harmonica, and I'm watching 1944's Double Indemnity now per your recommendation. You're the best. Be well. Well, Mukbang Reviews, if you're around tonight on Whining About Movies, Elizabeth and I are going to be talking about Double Indemnity, which is to me one of the classic noirs ever made. And it's just a wonderful, wonderful movie. So if you've never heard of it or never seen it, It's from 1944, and it's directed by the great Billy Wilder, with a screenplay by Raymond Chandler and Billy Wilder, based on a James Cain novella, which was in fact based on a true story of a case he covered while he was a reporter in 1927 about a woman and her boyfriend plotting to kill her husband. Or they did kill her husband or something. I'll have to look into that before I go on the show. But yes, it's great. Claudius sends in, oh, hang on. Dancing Dog sends in another tip and says, Dick Smith, Rick Baker, Rob Bottin, Chris Wallace. Robert, who has taken the mantle from these amazing makeup artists? Is there not a great demand for makeup people with CGI these days? And your thoughts on the night they raided Minsky's? I have not seen the night they raided Minsky's. It is a hole in my cinematic education. You know what? The Friends of Eddie Coyle. It's like that. One day I'm going to see the night that raided Minsky's. I have not seen the night that they raided Minsky's. I need to see it. I know, terrible. But Dancing Dog's question: Dick Smith, Rick Baker, Rob Bottin, and Chris Wallace. Who's taken the mantle from these amazing makeup artists? No one. Unfortunately, there's still a lot of great makeup artists that are working today in film, but it's just different now so much. When I saw, was it Pirates of the Caribbean 3, when they did a lot of with Davy Jones, they did a lot of the makeup, it was CG on the faces and stuff. It's a different world. And I think practical makeup effects, I mean, whether it's John Chambers or the people you mentioned, I still think if you went back and asked all of the makeup artists who they were influenced by, I still think Dick Smith is probably the great one, probably one of the best. Little Big Man, David Bowie's makeup in The Hunger, The Exorcist. But maybe Rick Baker would be considered the GOAT. But Rick Baker designed, he designed creature makeups, not so much just makeups on people, whereas Dick Smith did that. And Rob Bottin, of course, did The Howling, and John Carpenter's The Thing, and I'm a huge fan of Rob Bottin too. And Chris Wallace came on and did The Fly, and he was like, was Chris Wallace second generation? I don't know. I just don't think that there's you go back and you look at the K&B guys, and I think everybody who worked at K&B, Kurtzman and Nicotero, they're still out there, aren't they? They're still doing stuff. I don't know. I would say Dick Smith is probably still the GOAT. Maybe not, but even the makeup effects guys always looked to Dick Smith. I know that Rick Baker did. So probably I would say that. But I don't, unfortunately, I don't see many, it's just a different world now with CG creature effects and all that. But that's a good question. Claudius sends in a tip and says, everyone come behold Christopher Tracy's parade. Tracy died soon after a long-fought civil war. Bonjour, Roberto. I am drinking Hendrick's gin while listening to you pontificate on Post-Geekdom. Question, what are your thoughts on a Daredevil movie? Should it reintroduce Elektra in the Hand? You know what? A Daredevil movie, I mean, we saw Elektra. There was Elektra, there's Jennifer's Elektra, and then there was an Elektra movie, and that didn't turn out so well. And then we saw Elektra in the TV show. The TV show did a pretty good job. I don't think that Elektra has been depicted. I mean, I think back, I go back, like behind me here, I've got Daredevil. So, I mean, this is one beautiful omnibus. And this is the Miller and Klaus Janson Daredevil. This is the first one. And, of course, you've got this Frank Miller. These things, I just don't think, as much as I like the Marvel series, nothing. By the way, if you like Daredevil, these omnibuses, they don't have dust jackets. They're so good. I love these. These are some of my favorite Marvel omnibuses. These stories are great. And I would love to see a Daredevil film done in this style. I feel like I like was it 2003? Was it 2003? Mark Steven Johnson's Daredevil. I kind of like it. I don't love it, but I think you definitely could do a new Daredevil movie and really do it justice. But again, I don't know. I don't know if they'll ever do it, but I feel they could. They could really bring back the hand, and I just didn't feel it hit it didn't hit hard enough. I think you could do it. And then, as much as I enjoy the director's cut of the Ben Affleck Daredevil movie, it's deeply flawed. It doesn't have enough verisimilitude. There's so many CG skylines and everything, and I understand what they were trying to do, but I really think to make the ultimate Daredevil movie, you've got to make it either look like Joker or Taxi Driver. You've really got to go on location and make it down and dirty and gritty. And I don't know, New York, the Hell's Kitchen of the 70s, is not the New York of today. And it's just a very different place. And I think if you were going to make the ultimate Daredevil movie, you'd have to be a period piece. That's just me. I don't know. I could be wrong. Evan Newman sends in a tip and says, the Ralph scenes in Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, Rafe, are the first time I remember noticing shaky cam in a movie. The Ralph, would you say Ralph, Rafe, Raphael? I mean, would that be the Ralph scenes? By the way, I wish I was drinking Hendrix right now. To be honest, I'm liquor free here in the Robservatory, which I usually like to have maybe a beer or some whiskey in here, but I just don't. I got to hit the grocery store. The Ralph scenes, the Raphael scenes in Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles are the first time I remember noticing shaky cam in a movie. It was used to show his emotion, anger boiling over, which I thought was so cool. The Turtles' banter was great, and Ilias Koteas will always be Casey Jones. It's just great. Ilias Koteas is one of those great, I believe he's a good Canadian kid. I always have liked him. He goes all the way back to like the John Hughes movie, Some Kind of Wonderful, where he's the you think he's a thug, but then he turns out to be the nice guy who does funny graffiti on his desk when he's in detention with Eric Stoltz. And of course he's in Cronenberg's Crash. I'm a huge fan of Ilias Koteas. But yeah, he is. Could there be a Casey Jones with he's the best. I really liked him. Mark C. sends in a super chat and says, you showed Elizabeth a film noir movie and it didn't star Robert Mitchum? How dare you? Well, dude, come on. Double Indemnity defines the film noir genre. So yes, I dare. Pew Pew Monger. Pew Pew Monger sends in a super chat and says, hi Rob, medium time listener, first time super chatter. What's your take on Hollywood's obsession on a robot uprising like Solo, Westworld, Picard, etc.? Gosh, and iRobot and Ex Machina and Blade Runner. It's so many. iRobot. I think that there's something, first of all, inherently this idea that human beings are going to be supplanted. There's whenever you have an underlying idea, mutants, the idea that Homo Superior, the X-Men's Homo Superior, was ever going to replace, the whole comic is based on humanity's fear of mutants because they're going to replace mankind. I think there's something inherently irresistible in that premise, and the idea that it is we who are engineering synthetic life. We are the people that are making the robots. We are engineering our own demise, which is what we're doing anyway, via climate change or income inequality. There's so many things that human beings are doing to speed up our own demise, which I find is interesting. That's the great folly of being man, of being a human being. That doesn't mean we'll stick around for a while, but I think that's part of it. I think part of that our machines are going to somehow supplant us or take over. The fact that automation is replacing manufacturing jobs and all of that. I think it's inherently something that our own creations, a Battlestar, the things you mentioned, Solo, Westworld, and Picard are just the latest, Battlestar Galactica being one, especially the Ron Moore, David Icke version. This idea that an inhuman machine will replace a human being is definitely something that we are obsessed by. But I think it's sort of strange. This idea that we anthropomorphize machines and then we make them destructive or something. I don't necessarily think that would be the case. I don't know if that would be true. AB Abash 38412 sends in a super chat that says, "Have you seen Tokyo Story?" Beautiful, beautiful film. Tokyo Story is a fantastic movie and a fantastic Criterion Blu-ray. If you wanted to, did you see it on the Criterion channel? I don't know if you did or not, but yes, Tokyo Story is one of those movies I keep rebuying in different formats, Laserdisc, DVD, and it's it's of course. Hang on, of course it's famously. Oops, I didn't mean to just blast that in there. Sorry about that. But yes, there's Tokyo Story from the. Yeah, I went to the wrong. I've gone to the completely the wrong place, so I didn't mean to do that. But yes, Tokyo Story was directed by the great Ozu, one of the great Japanese directors. And if you haven't seen Tokyo Story, it's an amazing film. But I was going to get the names of the actors, which I probably wouldn't be able to pronounce anyway. Yeah. Chishu Ryu and Cheiko Hayashigama. And it's a story about families and generations and it's just a exquisitely beautiful movie. And if you guys have never seen Tokyo Story, they probably have it on the Criterion channel, but it's got to be streaming somewhere. And it's just one of the great movies. And Ozu, if you haven't seen an Ozu movie, it's a great place to start. Wow, it's just what a beautiful, beautiful movie. Oh, you know what? Hang on. There is a trailer for it. A trailer for Tokyo Story. And how cool is it? I'll put it in the live chat. Here you go. Here's a trailer for Tokyo Story. But it's a really interesting look at post-war Japan and a time that I guess really doesn't exist anymore, but really great insight into Japanese culture. And if you haven't seen Ozu, there's so much great world cinema from post-World War II, whether it's Japanese cinema. Remember, it's not just Godzilla, folks. Kurosawa, Ozu, there's so many great directors that began working in the post-war era. Same with Italian films and French films and really interesting stuff. So, yes, good stuff, ladies and gentlemen. Tokyo Story is like you said, it's a beautiful movie. I think anybody that will, I know Detective Jim Boyers, our own Detective Jim, Jim's here. Detective Jim will apparently not watch subtitled movies. He doesn't dig them. So I don't know if Detective Jim will ever delve in and check out Tokyo Story. But hey, I think that what can you do? What can you do? You got to watch subtitled movies. So, yeah. So I'm looking for letters. Hang on here. John Hines sent in a super chat and says, "Will you review the original Brian Fuller disco episodes?" Well, as you know, they were only ever written, and I don't know how I could review those disco episodes. They were obviously never made, and there's only 2 finished scripts and maybe 13 outlines. I guess I could figure out a way, like if I somehow had access to what was written, but I couldn't do it without Brian Fuller's approval. I couldn't do that. That wouldn't be good. Maybe I could offer my impressions on them. I got a copyright strike against this channel that doesn't expire until May because I covered the Dune screenplay, and which I did. Admittedly, I did read a bit out of it, but it was from the book, and I did get a copyright strike, which is sort of interesting because I really just talked about the movie. So I don't know if I could. People would. I think I already piss people off enough when it comes to Star Trek, and I don't know if I'd want to do that. Although it is really interesting. Maybe I could cover them overall, give my overall impressions of what was written compared to what showed up. I mean, I don't see why not. I didn't get a copyright strike against me covering the Duel of the Fates script because I guess it doesn't technically exist, so there's no copyright Is it copyright material, like development material? I think it's interesting. But yeah, I mean, who knows? That's an interesting thought. I don't want to do it. I wouldn't want to do it unless I had asked, to be honest. I mean, I'd have to ask before I did something like that, because if I hadn't asked, I wouldn't want to do it. Here comes a letter from our own Jeffrey Mao. It's been a while since we heard from Jeffrey Mao, but he writes, "Good morning, Rob. Wow, for not even having watched the last 7 episodes of Star Trek Picard, I sure waded into it on Twitter," which I suppose was to be expected. "I tweeted out that I thought that Picard's frequent use of the word fuck pretty much invalidated its standing as any kind of true Star Trek. For all the likes and retweets that my tweet received, there were, of course, the usual idiots who called me a soccer mom, or who otherwise intimated that I was a prude, and generally stating that modern Star Trek without cursing and profanity is somehow antiquated and old-fashioned, even though they're swearing by using what would by then be antiquated and old-fashioned words. God forbid, get with the modern times here, people. So I wanted to tie together this notion that Star Trek cannot possibly be written nowadays without profanity, and that somehow it needs to have it, as well as a lot of rewriting of history, into a new axiom that I've come up with. I know that you've mentioned it many times before, but there seems to be a line of excuses that are spouted by fans and supporters of Picard that somehow, because of the original series being on TV and therefore censored, they couldn't show violence and profanity. It was the censorship holding them back. Michael Chabon himself has floated that ridiculous notion. It was the censorship holding them back, and if the reins were off, Kirk and Spock and McCoy would be dropping F-bombs left and right, and people would be losing their heads every episode, much like in Star Trek Picard. Yes, standards for broadcast TV did influence the depiction of Star Trek originally, and for its subsequent series and films. But I submit that those standards helped to define the classic look and feel of Trek in a way that if the show had debuted much later, it would not have had nearly the same appeal. The series was set in a future that one would hope had advanced far enough where the crudity of modern everyday language would no longer be needed, and that violence, while still present, would not be an everyday occurrence. I think that set an idealism about the show that has endured to this day. If Star Trek had not had those, I don't even want to call them restrictions, I think the show would have been relegated to the status of being just another show. In other words, sometimes imposed standards and restrictions will spur an effort to be more creative and resourceful in your storytelling. And in Star Trek the original series, it certainly showed. Just like you've mentioned many times about the episode Let That Be Your Last Battlefield. They couldn't outright come out and comment on racism, so they worked around it in a way that everyone still got what their point was. I feel like every show and movie has a natural set point from where their rating standard should be. Crime shows should definitely be more wide open when it comes to showing violence, language, and sex because its nature requires it. When the standards on TV opened up and shows started taking advantage, like with NYPD Blue, the quality of the shows started improving, and from the 90s onward, we had a golden age of cop and crime shows. Now, did NYPD Blue go a little gratuitous sometimes? Sure. I think sometimes they push things just for the sake of it. But take Miami Vice. I could not stand how they never showed blood when people were shot. And in a show where people get shot a lot, it becomes all the more jarring when you don't see the squib shots. I didn't know the word at the time, but it took so much of the verisimilitude out of it for me. So watch the Christopher Nolan Batman movies, especially watch the beginning of Joker. Watch the beginning of the first Dark Knight, during the scene where Joker is gunning everybody down. There's no blood. There's no squibs. And it's in that movie. I didn't know the word at the time, but it took so much verisimilitude out of it for me. So for a show like Miami Vice, I wanted more, and it needed more. But with Star Trek, I don't need more. The show does not benefit at all by being allowed to show that. I don't feel in any way that Star Trek would somehow be stifled because they can't show sex, violence, and language. I just do not buy what people are arguing, saying that if it wasn't for the imposed standards, that Star Trek would be rife with sex, language, and violence. Michael Chabon, the showrunner himself, said that. And once you've said something which I think is fairly ludicrous and shows not a whole lot of thought was put into that answer, where are you going to go? When your showrunner says this, fans are going to show, but he's won a Hugo and a Pulitzer and a Nebula. If he says that it's because of standards and practices they couldn't swear on the show, then, well, you know what my problem I have with Picard and their use of the word fuck? It's the 24th fucking century, and they wouldn't be saying fuck anymore. You have a whole galaxy full of language and a whole galaxy full of swear words. If the show was fucking creative, they would fucking come up with their own fucking swear words, like frack or something else. It's a fucking another example of their fucking uncreativeness. Those fucking writers, those talentless fucking hacks with their Pulitzers and their Hugos and their Nebulas. Saying the word fuck on Star Trek is so dumb. I mean, you have a whole galaxy out there. Like, wouldn't it be more interesting if Rios, like, you had a character that would enjoy the profanity of other, let me tell you about Vulcan profane words, or Romulan profane words, or Andorian words, or words from Ferenginar, or Cardassian swear. Like, it would be a character that you could actually incorporate it in, and you'd have to make up new swear words. That would be cool. But everybody's saying fuck all the time. It's so weird. Spacefaring people that have been to how many? A Starfleet officer, we're Starfleet, we're going to say fuck? You're going to use a word that's hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years old? It's so uncreative. I mean, my problem with that is if you want to swear on a show about space with aliens from 1,000 galaxies, and you're going to say fuck, you've lost. You've lost. Now, I understand aliens, space truckers, other than the alien, or Arcturians, which you never see, pretty much humanoids are the only people out there for the most part. But, I mean, they don't even say fuck. That's in English. Yeah, what about all the swear words that exist on this planet no one's using? What about great swear words in Chinese? Willow Yang, what are some of the filthiest words I can learn to say in Chinese that I can say on this show because nobody knows they're filthy? I mean, it's such a... Anyway, I haven't even finished your article. I haven't even finished your letter. Basically, I challenge anyone to explain how the show is better because they use F words. But on the other hand, though, if, say, a Quentin Tarantino did an alternate take on Star Trek where there was free reign on offensiveness, I'd be all for it. Because it's not canon, and it's its own thing, because from the get-go we understand what we're stepping into. And this leads to my new axiom. It's not a Burnett axiom, and I don't know if it even fits the proper definition of the word axiom, but I'd like to use axiom for consistency. That is, that every narrative entertainment product, so this covers any kind of format, has both an accepted and necessary level of, for lack of a better term, offensiveness. I guess the content that would increment the rating from G, basically. Just like I would expect sex, nudity, language, and violence in a Pixar film, I also expect sufficient violence in a war film. Any war film that isn't rated R is suspicious to me. I don't need Saving Private Ryan storming the Omaha Beach levels of gore, but it needs to be appropriate to the subject matter. I suppose the next question would be, how are the levels established? I would say part of it is based on the genre of the work. We know that horror needs to allow a little more than a romance, for example. Sometimes it can be a little more unclear, and in that case you would just need an organic development of that standard. TV series are good for that because you can try a different tone per episode. The nice thing about non-serialized series was that you could throw out a curveball, like with the occasional humorous X-Files episode, for example. You can try a somewhat edgier episode, and if that doesn't seem to work, you can pull it back. But eventually the responsibility lies with the creator or creators to properly set the tone in their initial scripts and treatments. If that is done properly, then we get the Picard F-bomb surprises. Thanks for parking our shuttlecrafts in the same shuttle bay, Jeffrey Mao. Well, Jeffrey, I couldn't agree with you more. The problem with the F-bombs on Picard is not that they were saying fuck or using profanity. The problem is that Star Trek as a genre doesn't do that. And by saying fuck, it's totally incongruous with the last 50 years of Star Trek. And people are like, oh, Michael Chabon's like, well, that was because of censorship. No, I don't think so. I think they were trying to make Star Trek appeal to everybody. I think they were trying to make, early on when I started doing Robservations, I got a thoughtful letter from a gentleman. He probably has turned this show off by now. But because of their beliefs, they didn't like profanity in their entertainment. And they had asked my opinion on it. And it was one of those things that I thought about for a long time. His letter really resonated with me. And I think that I don't see that sex scenes and profanity really belong in Star Trek. Star Trek has traditionally always appealed to... Now, that's not to say Deep Space Nine dealt with, like, the murder of a Romulan to bring in the rest of the Romulans into the Dominion War on the side of the Federation, a side of the, I guess you'd call it the Allied powers. But, and while they might have scenes of people getting up in bed together or something, there was no gratuitous sex or bad language or real violence in Star Trek, certainly not people being beheaded. And all of these things doesn't make you cool. It makes you look like you're kind of adolescent and pandering because you're not clever enough to tell your story without putting in these things. I just, like you, Jeffrey, I think you have to know your audience. And the fact is that Star Trek has always traditionally been, it's not Breaking Bad. And you can have violence, but do you have to show someone's head actually get cut off? That is R-rated violence. It's R-rated violence. And Star Trek is not R-rated. It's barely PG. Star Trek the Motion Picture was rated fucking G. And it's like, you can't... I just think it was gratuitous and stupid, and it took you out of it because of the fact that and they had to make a point of it, like they said it in every episode or whatever. It just was so... Look at the fact that we have... look, I like Ann Magnuson as an actress, but the fact that she says sheer fucking hubris, that has become a meme that has detracted from the show more than anything else. And I agree with you. I think certain shows, you need to know your audience, you need to know your tone, and you need to know, I think that swearing in Star Trek, it doesn't belong in Star Trek. I just think it was lame, and you come off as an idiot for using it. So at least that's it. Speaking of that, Dean Mikitich writes to us. I got some old school letter writers here. Dean Mikitich says, "Hi, Rob and the Post-Geek Singularity. I just finished watching the last episode of Picard. And I sat there stunned, thinking, what the fuck did I just watch? I thought the only good part of this episode was the chat between Picard and Data. But like you said, it was all stuff we'd seen before and better. Where did that romance between Seven and Rafi come from? There was no lead up to it, and also Rafi is proven to be straight. Her husband and son left her as told or seen in episode 5. Yeah, but that's probably because, yes, I know by the 24th century the view of sexuality will be different from our own and be more open and accepting. Hell, our own views have changed a lot on the subject in the last 60 years, but that romance came out of nowhere and made no sense like the rest of this show. Okay, I'd admit it, if I was female and Seven tried it on with me, I might find it very hard to say no." Oh, come on, that's the cis hetero male in you talking. Needless to say, this show has a huge number of plot holes in it, which are too many to go into in this letter, otherwise I'd be writing all day. But everyone seems to be missing the plot hole that you can fly an entire universe through. The Zhat Vash has been trying to stop synths in the known space of the Alpha and Beta Quadrant. But what about the rest of the galaxy? Good point. While we did not get to explore much of the Gamma Quadrant in Deep Space Nine due to the Dominion, and only a limited part of the Delta Quadrant thanks to Voyager, there are still millions upon millions of unexplored planets with intelligent life on it. Are you telling me that none of these aliens are developing their own AI and synths, and have not gotten them to the point where the outer galaxy AI synths would be interested in saving them? We know that there are android synths being developed in the rest of the galaxy, as we saw this in Season 2, Episode 3 of Voyager, called Prototype, directed by Jonathan Frakes. Voyager comes across a damaged android which B'Elanna Torres is able to repair. The repairs to the android power systems, which is something this android and its fellow androids are unable to do, and believes Torres could teach them to build more of their numbers, so it kidnaps her. She only helps so Harry isn't killed. During the episode, it is learned that the android and fellow droids were built for war, and another race who built their own android army. After years of fighting, the two organic races came to peace, but their creations turned on their masters and wiped them out and continued to fight. B'Elanna destroys the prototype, but it's too late as the androids now have the knowledge to build more. We never learn what happens to this race of androids, but I'm sure one side would have won. They could then start to develop themselves to better models, and they get the attention of the external galactic AI synth race, which would bring them into the galaxy anyway, and there's nothing the Zhat Vash could do to stop them. This is just one race of android synths that we know of, in a part of the galaxy that would take decades for the Zhat Vash to get to. How many more are there that are more advanced that we don't know about? Like I said, that's a pretty huge plot hole you could fly literally an entire universe or an entire galaxy through. Another issue I have with the portal is that it was opened with the tentacles coming out of it. Why didn't the Romulans or Starfleet start shooting at the thing? It was obvious that a danger was coming out of it. I expect this sort of story from Kurtzman, but not from Michael Chabon, who claims to be a Star Trek fan and Pulitzer Prize and Nebula winner, novelist who was promoted to showrunner. We know that by episode 7, the story was not working. They had to retool, and given Chabon had won these awards, I expect a far better job. He's maybe crap at script writing, but he should be damn good at laying down a story that people who know how to write a script could run with. Alas, this evidently did not happen, and now I'm having a hard time to decide, given the stories we have with Picard and Discovery, which so is worse. Even with its flaws, the writing on classic Trek was never this bad, and is far superior. Until Discovery Season 3, for more rants on Trek, live long and prosper, to Rob and the Post-Geek Singularity. Well, you know what? That's something I haven't even considered. It's very interesting, because I think that the fact that synthetic life is synthetic life, I mean, is just because you've built a machine to look like it's anthropomorphized, is that synthetic life? I mean, basically, it's just a machine. Isn't an android? Sure, it's an advanced machine, but what if you built an android that does? My problem is they seem to have synthetic life is one thing, but anthropomorphized machines that look like people are another. And why is synthetic life? Couldn't synthetic life be microbiological? Like, I don't understand. The whole idea of synths seem to be humanoid-shaped machines, which to me is the dumbest thing in the world, and it shows an utter lack of sophistication by anybody who's involved in this story. Artificial intelligence, I mean, I would think that AI itself is more dangerous than synthetic life. It's not really about, it's about the mind. It's the mind, and synthetic life, it was so muddled, the whole idea of this, well, we have to stop synthetic life. Well, why? Like, isn't it the intelligence? Isn't it AI, which means then it's the operating system that's dangerous, not the vessel that the operating system transports around in? So it was, none of it made any sense. None of it made any sense. And the people that breeze by that are like, I get it. We fall in love. You're looking at anthropomorphized machines, but they're still machines. You could put them in the body of dogs. If they were in the body of dogs, if Sutra and Daj and Soji were actually in bodies that were not humanoid, like if they were in animal bodies, like what if you put Daj in the body of an elephant? Would that be just as dangerous if some elephant sauntered up to Picard and said, "Oh my God, I'm in trouble, they're after me"? Would it be the same show, or did she have to look like a very attractive young girl for Picard to take notice? Would Picard have cared if it wasn't? That's why part of my problem with the overall show is these. It is so you're dealing with a third grade level of understanding of these science fiction concepts. That's what's so annoying about it. I mean, if you go back to like the Inner Light, in order to really grasp the true ramifications of that, you have to start thinking about the idea of okay, our perception. What if you suddenly, your mind was taken over by an alien probe, and you thought from your perspective that you were whisked away to an alien planet, to a civilization that you'd never been to, a non-spacefaring civilization that had no way to communicate with the Enterprise, and then you had to live out the next half century of your life, and that passed in real time according to your perception. So you lived 50 years or 60 years. All the people that you met would be just as real to you as anybody else you'd ever met. And then you wake up 50 years later and you're on the bridge of the Enterprise and people are looking down at you. Something that happened 50 years ago. I mean, that's an amazing, heady science fiction concept. And I don't think people really grasp. Some people do. They understand the ramifications of it. That's why we're science fiction fans. But I don't think that when Michael Chabon discounts the idea of Picard ever having kids, like, he can't talk. He doesn't know how to talk to a young girl. Well, yes, he does. Because in Picard's mind, he lived 50 years or 50 plus years, and he grew old and died or whatever, became an old man. That was just as real as anything else that's ever happened to him. So when Picard says he's 96, you know what they should have done? I mean, what I think would have been really interesting is if Picard added that time to his own age. And they never did this in Next Gen. I always wanted them to. But if Picard comes back and he says, I just lived 50 or 60 or 70 years, he had that much more tacked onto his life. And they could have, if Chabon was a really good writer, if anybody had really understood Star Trek, they would have tacked that on when he's talking about, couldn't you have given me like another 10 years? I mean, remember, I did get 60 or 70 or 50 years extra when I was attacked by that alien probe and I had to live another life. I mean, really smart, really astute science fiction writers. Vince Gilligan would have done that. But, I agree with you. I think the ideas of synths as portrayed in Star Trek Picard were at a grade school level of understanding. They were portrayed as grade school level. If I was writing a science fiction story in the 5th grade, that's what I would have written. And it bums me out. It bums me out. John D. This comes from John D. Rob, wow. All I can say, wow. It's sort of a sad state to be in as my wife and I sat watching the final episode of this travesty of TV injustice that I was getting more and more excited to hear one of your epic rants than I was watching the dribble on the screen before me. I'd say, boy, I can't wait to hear what Rob says about this crappy plot hole, but I bet John will love it. Laugh out loud. Not sure if you heard me out all the way in Pasadena or not. I was literally shouting out loud at each twist and turn of this ridiculous plot. Kill Data? Really? And Picard, did you notice they didn't even have to construct the clone body just to look like him and use for seasons 2, 3, 4, and 5 and beyond? There's no way they could have constructed one that quickly. So what? They planned on him dying and had the synth body already all along for him to just suck his consciousness into? How'd they know that it would even be needed? But maybe my least favorite plot hole, yes, aside from there only being 10 space orchids left for their entire planetary defense system, but in the final battle it looked like hundreds or thousands, was that our favorite murderous doctor had the space ray gun, where all you have to do is use your imagination. So why didn't she just imagine away his brain cancer or tumor? Why couldn't that be the first thing you did with the toy ray gun after you'd heard he had a terminal condition? And yes, I shouted aloud one more time when they announced his synth body had a lifespan included. Just crazy stuff. Help. Well, John D., all I can say is that we could forever talk about Picard's failings as a science fiction show. And the thing is, there's not just 1 or 2 or 10. There's 100 different things, probably 10 in every episode, where you can ask yourself, wait, what? I think as far as science fiction writing goes, it's one of the great failures of science fiction on TV. And because it's Star Trek, which has always provided, for the most part, Tiffany-level sci-fi, with that blue box and white ribbon, it's even more disappointing, especially when you have Michael Chabon as showrunner. And it's almost, again, not everybody knows or can write great and compelling science fiction. I mean, they just can't. And even shows like Battlestar Galactica, they never really defined the Cylons enough for my liking. They didn't really get into, if you can procreate with a Cylon, that Cylon's alive. Yet they've got glowing spines. I mean, they really played fast and loose with that. But I think what they wanted to do, I mean, how do you go from Centurions to being humanoid? I just assumed that eventually the Cylon Centurions would eventually start building organic bodies, much like the replicants were built in Blade Runner. They're real bodies. Maybe everything worked, maybe everything didn't. I don't know. Clearly, if reproduction works, that's a level of sophistication that you must admire. But yeah, they didn't really get into that. And the fact is, Jean-Luc Picard died. He's dead. He might have a synth body now, but he died. What you're seeing is now somebody who's had their consciousness downloaded into an android body. But Jean-Luc Picard is dead. He died. And I don't think that there's a lot of plot holes there that we're dealing with, a lot. And I'm with you. This next one comes from Rocky Severino. Rob, I've been thinking about these strange Star Trek series we've been getting. They are so odd. And we clearly haven't gotten proper Trek in about 2 decades. You know what? I think that's a good way of looking at it. They are odd. I mean, even Doctor Who with its rebooting, beginning with Eccleston and all that, they still felt like Doctor Who. Maybe it was a format thing. But nothing in the shows, like Discovery, all of it feels odd to me because none of it jibes with any previous Star Trek. Even Pike and Spock, like, this is just odd because you're watching this new character, Spock with a beard and all that. And it's like, all of it's odd. Anyway, Rob, I've been thinking about these strange Star Trek series we've been getting. They're so odd, and we clearly haven't gotten proper Trek in about 2 decades. I like some Voyager and Enterprise, but I ask myself, why do they think this will work? I'm speculating here, but I think the answer is panic. CBS is desperate to get into the streaming game. They know the days of television broadcasting has essentially gone the way of the horse-drawn buggy. So they have this one IP, and someone at the top has said, this is our Pied Piper. So how do we make it 4-quadrant? How do we make it must-watch, must-subscribe? So all the modern tropes are being trotted out. I'm going to list some, but please don't think I'm saying any of these are bad in themselves. Female protagonist, female empowerment, minority representation, pro-LGBT, action explosions, lots of sex, lots of torrid romance. Typically a villain will be a lover, typically male, even more typical a white male. Now there's nothing wrong with any of those. I've enjoyed every one of those things at one time or another. For instance, I enjoy Rey, Finn, and Poe. I wish something had been done with them. I really enjoyed Luke and Han. Their white maleness has nothing to do with that. Just as my dislike of a mutinous Burnham has nothing to do with her race or gender. So when I look at the checklist up there, I ask myself, where is the space left for story, character development, character growth, and arcs? What did Picard learn from this series? To be Picard again? That's what they did with Luke. No, Rocky, you don't understand. Luke needed to learn about failure. You mean like when he learned about failure 40 years ago in Empire? Well, Rocky, he needed to learn to let go of his fear and become the best man he could be, even if it killed him. You mean like when after beating his father and throwing away his lightsaber 40 years ago? I hate to say this, but I think people forget in storytelling there's a place for Mary Sue's. Gandalf, the Emperor, Obi-Wan, etc. It's expected that the young hero has more to learn and is incompetent rather than the mentor or the antagonist. The Emperor essentially didn't have an arc. Obi-Wan didn't have or need an arc in the original trilogy. Even Gandalf essentially put on a new coat to simply be more Gandalfy. So I'm not sure why I need to see Luke learn the same lessons again. And I'm skeptical of any story that's goal is to give me a Picard who realizes he should be Picard. Duh. That's why I tuned in. Anyway, I hope you and yours are healthy, wealthy, and wise. Warmest regards, Rocky. P.S. I like that Willow. She's cool. Well, Rocky, thanks for writing in. And yes, sir, look, I agree with you. I think, again, it is what we've got is we don't have enough. I mean, there's not enough creativity to go come up with these new stories. So what we're doing is we're getting old, familiar stories simply imposed on our characters. And I find it weird. Like I would rather have seen a new, all of the stuff that's in Star Trek Picard. Every episode is chock full of interesting, completely undeveloped ideas. And what's really interesting is if you look at the synths, the AIs, there's only one idea that I would have dispensed with entirely, in the Star Trek Picard show, and that is the idea of a galaxy-spanning synth overlord race that's out there that now knows where we are, because then the question will arise, well, what about them? Are they going to come get us? I mean, once Cthulhu, Synth Cthulhu is out there, and Synth Cthulhu is going to come get us at any one moment. Synth Cthulhu, we don't need in Star Trek. It was a dumb idea. But the idea of, first of all, if they had defined what synths meant, I guess we're supposed to just assume they're robots that look like people. Well, why are they a threat? We didn't even have any scheming by synths themselves until the very end when Sutra decides, and look, well, we got to go with our new AI overlords. What? In the 11th hour? I wanted to know, like, what did this synth society have going for it that the other synths, what was the relationship? Why is Bruce Maddox gone? Bruce Maddox should have become the non-synth spokesperson for synths. Like, what are they trying to do? Why are synths important? And what should have happened is, well, as we know from Measure of a Man, we're looking for new life. Well, there it sits. How are synths new life? What do they represent aside from living on synth at Synth Club Med? I mean, if they're building things and creating these artistic and technological wonders that are supposed to, I don't know what, but, if you look at the movie Her is about an AI, an operating system that gains sentience and all that. Her is a far more, I know it's a romance and all that, but if you look at it, if you distill it down to its science fiction components, Her is a far more mature and compelling look at the ramifications of AI as it relates to human beings than anything in Star Trek Picard. The people that are writing this show are treating synths as the most rudimentary, dumbed-down science fiction concept ever, and it's really frustrating. It was really frustrating to watch because it's so monumentally dumb. I mean, any science fiction writer worth their salt, and Michael Chabon is a Hugo and Nebula award-winning science fiction writer, and there's the ramifications of all this aren't even dealt with. Not even to the point where Picard's like, yep, we've given you a lifespan. Why would you do that? If you're going to put somebody into a synthetic body that's already 90 years old, the whole idea of that the synthetic body is that you could live forever, as we learned in What Are Little Girls Made Of, which Michael Chabon cites. It's like I'm reading... The proof is in the pudding, and the writing is it was so rudimentary. That's what was it didn't deal with these science fiction concepts at all. And I feel that it is really a bummer. This next letter is from Mark Blatt. Mark Blatt says, "Hi, Rob. This is my first, but hopefully not my last, letter to the Robservatory. I enjoy watching your podcast, and my letter is concerning the Picard show. I should mention that I have not been watching the show since the episode where they reintroduced Seven of Nine. Now, I have a question for you. I talked to one of my friends about the show, and he asked why do they make Star Trek shows when they clearly don't want to make Star Trek shows? Aside from the obvious they want to make money, I can't come up with an answer. So my question for you is the same question my friend asked me. Dear Robert, why do they make Star Trek shows when they clearly don't want to make Star Trek shows? Is the reason that no one who worked on the old shows are involved anymore, and that the current creative team have never watched an episode of TNG and don't know what Star Trek is? I remember Star Trek as being a utopia filled with optimism and the human desire to explore. Also, why must every show today be dark and gritty and portray a world that Batman would be right at home in? Let me end my letter with another thing my friend said. It's pretty clear that Gene Roddenberry is dead. Greetings, and live long and prosper, Mark Blatt." Well, Mark, first of all, thank you for writing in your first letter to the Robservatory, to Robservations, and to me. I appreciate that. Look, the name of the game, it isn't show friends, it's show business. And it's not show philosophy, it's show business. And it's not show legacy, it's show business. And Star Trek is, for lack of a better term, Star Trek is it's brand recognition. What Star Trek actually is, I guess lots of people have different takes on it, but Alex Kurtzman, Bob Orsi, and J.J. Abrams brought Star Trek back in 2009. But here's the thing. J.J. Abrams was never a self-professed Star Trek fan. I think, here's what I think. If you are not, there's thousands of TV shows in the world. The people that are in charge at the network level, they might have been fans of television, but I've said this, it's just like at the studios. The people that are being put in positions of power, and when I say power, I mean people that are talking about what shows get made and what should happen, are usually Ivy League business people. They have Ivy League MBAs. And that, from a corporate standpoint, is who you hire. That's what corporations want to hire. Now, most places, like if it's a real estate firm or a marketing firm or a bank or something like that, that makes sense to me. But because that is a blanket corporate mandate, you have to hire people with a certain educational level. I totally understand that. But then those people get charged, they get put in charge of creatives. Storytelling. They don't have MBAs in storytelling. You know, I remember working with, but Lisa Henson, Jim Henson's daughter, 30 years ago when I worked at Warner Brothers. She was a senior vice president at Warner Brothers. Well, I had a massive crush on her. And I used to hang out in her office every night. Nothing happened, by the way, like that. But I really had a crush on her, and I looked upon her with awe. And if I remember correctly, she had a degree. I think she went to Yale, but I don't remember. It was a long time ago. That I seem to remember she had a degree in comparative mythology. And I'm like, well, this is the woman that I would hang my hat on. This is the woman and she was always at work the latest. She was always the person that was there late. And I would just go in her office, because I was there late too, and I would go in her office and sit in her office, and I was in awe of her, and I totally admired her, and her office was full of comic books and things that I knew. And I'm like, she's like my dream girl. Total dream girl, you know, because she's an executive at Warner Brothers. She has a degree in comparative mythology. Her dad was Jim Henson, and she has all of this stuff in her office. And she seemed to me the only legit person at the time for years. I've met very savvy studio executives since then. But at the time, all the other studio executives, I'm like, do you guys even know? Have you read any of the material other than scripts and coverage and things? Do you know anything? But I thought that Lisa, you know, she had a degree in comparative mythology. By the way, I could be romanticizing this all out of proportion. I think she did. I don't remember. I haven't talked to Lisa Henson in 25 years, I think. When I showed her, no, it had to have been in the late 90s, because I showed her my Star Trek Eternal tape. But yeah, these executives and the people, whether they're network executives, and by the way, the network executives that are in these positions, they give notes to the showrunners. So you're getting notes from people that aren't trained in storytelling, you know, but yet they're giving notes to people who are telling the stories. So I think what happens is when the studios, they're like, okay, we have Star Trek, we have to look on a spreadsheet. Like, I don't think audiences, or the people that are the showrunners, they're now like, oh, we have to have people that have showrunning. They have to have showrunning experience or movie experience. And if you've had that, well, they're not quantifying. You don't get jobs necessarily based on the quality of your work. You get jobs on name recognition about what you've worked on. Like, ooh, you worked on this show? Because it just assumes when your name is put down there, like, oh, you must have run that show or whatever. But the people you don't say no to a job. When you get hired, you're going to take that job. We as fans of Star Trek, and especially fans that know all have read all the technical manuals and know all the shows inside and out, there are very few of those fans who also are qualified to work on a TV show. Because if you've never worked on a TV show, you don't know how to work in a writer's room. You don't know how to conceive of a story arc. I mean, it's not like Michael Chabon is a hugely experienced television showrunner. Sure, he's worked on things like Spider-Man 2 that we've liked. But what was his contribution? I mean, there's many people now that have says in studio script writing. But I just think that it was disappointing. CBS mandates, we're going to go make a Picard show, because they thought that was going to be a slam dunk. Patrick Stewart has become a movie star in his own right, whether he's on television or whether he's playing Professor X or doing a turn on Logan or something, which makes $500 million worldwide. Patrick Stewart is now somebody everyone loves. 30 years ago, nobody had heard of him, but now everyone knows Patrick Stewart. To bring back Captain Picard is a no-brainer. Let's throw money at him. We'll get Patrick Stewart in. We'll tell him he can have creative input. And who's not going to watch that show? Well, then what happens is the same thing that happens. You've got people working on that show. You don't have one singular showrunner. I mean, I'm Academy Award winner Akiva Goldsman. I'm Alex Kurtzman. I've done this, and I'm Kirsten Beyer, and I'm Michael Chabon. And who's the showrunner? Who's the visionary that has the overall idea for what this show is going to be? Those are all strong people. Kirsten Beyer has written Star Trek novels. She knows Star Trek the best. Michael Chabon will probably come along and say, yeah, but I've won Pulitzers and I know Star Trek too. So, I mean, everybody says they like Star Trek. Everybody knows what everybody. My mom, do you like Star Trek? Yes, I like Star Trek. Is my mom qualified to write a Star Trek show? I don't know. But it's the same thing everywhere. You need a strong visionary showrunner that has an overarching idea. Modern Star Trek is obviously, from episode to episode, a gangbang of science fiction ideas that are cliche and they all come from someplace else. There's been nothing new that has been in Star Trek. There hasn't been one compelling new idea. People say, well, what about that spore drive? One, that's a very un-Star Trek idea, and two, it comes from Dune. Folding space and all that. It works with that franchise because it was developed. But in the Star Trek universe, when you already have warp, why are you changing the very propulsion system? Why is that even a thing? Unless you have a reason for it, why are you changing the very basic? It's supposed to be a prequel series, as somebody made a video pointing out. If they have the spore drive, then why don't you send that information to the Voyager and get the Voyager back home from the Delta Quadrant? I mean, the idea of that kind of a spore drive, just like transporters that can beam you from your snub fighter in San Francisco to the Klingon homeworld, if you have that kind of a powerful transporter, or a transporter that can beam from Delta Vega inside a pipe on the Enterprise at warp, I mean, you've destroyed whatever the Star Trek universe. I mean, all these things that make it work, you get rid of them all. And if you don't have any of that stuff, then it's not Star Trek anymore. They just don't want to make Star Trek. Why don't they want to make Star Trek? Because it's hard. And nobody wants to work in someone else's playground. They all want to make it their own. Every showrunner comes in, they make it their own. Because that's what they want to do. That's what creatives do. Why would we want to copy things? But yeah, it's money. It's lucrative. Here is a letter from Dieter Bastian from Deutschland. We haven't heard from Dieter. And by the way, Dieter's email address is Ford Fairlane, which makes me love Dieter even more. Anyway, greetings, Rob. Shiny Dieter here. Goddamn, Rob, I was excited about seeing the last episode of Star Trek Picard. Not about the last hour itself, because the show was already too far from saving. But that one star which burned bright at the end of the beacon to the synth world, listening afterwards to Robservations and Rob talking about it, which I haven't done at the moment of writing this. So let's dive into this last tearjerker episode. As the not-so-smart cookie that I am, I nevertheless knew by reading special guest star Jonathan Frakes in the opening credits what he would be doing in this episode. Come to save the day with Starfleet in command and a cocky attitude. Burning his fucking tomato pizza in the past, but now he would be on time with a limited crew. Or did you see more staff on his bridge than I was, Rob? I counted 2 in the background, but I confess it was already after midnight when I was watching it. Well, Rob, did you get Ghibli when Raffi and Rios used their imagination devices? I bet you would. But if you didn't see this twist coming, that you could do way more with it than just repairing ships, well then, Rob, I have bad news for you. Your imagination is lacking, you old fool. Get off the new Star Trek lawn. On the technical side of things, I unfortunately need your help, Rob. You can imagine thousands of identical ships. What happened to the good old-fashioned scanning devices on board the bridges? Are they out of commission, and that's why the Romulans couldn't detect fake from real? What is it with all that holographic stuff? Someone in the writer's room has surely seen a lot of past episodes of the holodeck, and you can always come at them with not doing their homework. Not cool, bro. Even the synth beacon was building itself in holographic fashion. But you gotta give it to them, Rob. Their plan about bringing that structure down was executed flawlessly. Only Rios messed it up by throwing the bombs instead of kicking it. Didn't want to show off his soccer talents, I guess. I was a little bummed out the Borg cube wasn't in the battle at all, but there was no room anyway up there in space with all those ships. Why do the makers nowadays think quantity outweighs majestic? It's the same problem I had with Star Wars: The Rise of Skywalker. In the good old days, damn, now I sound like you, Rob, there was that epic feeling to see a Star Destroyer, or even 3 at once, or a Romulan warbird, or 3 birds of prey. But in 2020, when you give me thousands of these spaceships at once, that tingling down my spine of seeing something epic or majestic is gone out the window. The design of the new warbird sucks anyway. But wait, by the way, that was his letter, not me. But wait, Soji has done it. Skynet is coming through the portal, wiping out the first season of Picard from existence. Oh, come on, stupid Soji. And then I came to realize the worst. During the 10 episodes of Star Trek Picard, I've become a synth too, Rob. Even when my body tells a different story. I couldn't muster one tear of emotion about the death of our title character. Maybe I knew ahead of time they would do the altered carbon thing, but without the altered part. Jean-Luc, you got screwed there. I will leave it at that, and will now immediately jump over to YouTube and listen to Robservations. Wait, I have to turn the volume down. No need for Rob's booming and angry voice to break my speakers. So, Rob, with famous lyrics from Ronnie James Dio. Don't talk to strangers on Twitter about Star Trek. I say, auf Wiedersehen. Best regards from Deutschland. Shiny Dieter. Well, everyone knows I love my Dieter Bastian letters. And, of course, Dieter did make me a fantastic video about Star Trek Picard. It's interesting. I mean, I'm not the only one. I'm not the only one talking Star Trek Picard the way everybody else is. And, yeah. So, yeah. It's true. Stubble McShave sends in a tip and says, these times engage our fight and flight reflexes, but we can do neither. This can lead to you feeling a bit down. Make sure to watch something uplifting and inspiring each day. A place to start is the DS9 episode I mentioned the other day called Explorers from Season 3. That's a great episode. Cisco and Jake, they build that Bajoran space sailing ship that Eagle Moss made a miniature of, which is very cool. Chairman Mouse sends in a tip and says, I, too, was always irked by the bloodlessness of the Nolan films. I'm not sure why. Also, why is it that you could see Coulson's girlfriend get shot in the neck on Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. and then bleeding out but don't see any blood in the Winter Soldier? It's very frustrating. Bob Kowal sends in a tip and says, just got here. What do you know? Star Trek synth talk. Hey, what about the progeny of Wesley Crusher's high school project? The Sentient Nano Hive. Yeah, I know. What happened with that, right? Comic Relief Cast sent in a super chat. Just wanted to say thank you, Paul C. Amazing community. That's Paul in Long Beach. Thank you, Paul C. Amazing community you fostered here, Rob. And Paul C. is definitely a Comic Relief trooper. Well, that comes from Comic Relief. That's Jacob Fudge, although I keep saying Jakob because it's spelled with a K. But he's Jacob. Dirty Nerdy sends in a tip and said, Picard would have been so much better if they brought in the Akutas as consultants. You know, it's funny to me, this idea, when you have an Academy Award winner like Akiva Goldsman, and you've got a Pulitzer, Nebula, or Pulitzer, Nebula, and Hugo winner like Michael Chabon, I mean, on a spreadsheet, you've won. You've got Kirsten Beyer, who's a Star Trek novelist, a Voyager novelist, and a good Star Trek novelist. You've won. You don't need anything more. From a corporate standpoint, if you're looking at that spreadsheet, you've got, look at these winning people and look at their credits. We win. It doesn't matter. You know, you might have all the talent in the world, but that doesn't mean you're the talent that needs to work on Star Trek or that is best for Star Trek. You've got to find the right talent for the right thing. Like I've shown you, I've got 4 of Michael Chabon's books right up above me right here, and I dearly love them. And his book on manhood, he wrote a chapter about what it was like to be a kid. We're basically the same age growing up, that I thought was absolutely sublime. I love Michael Chabon's writing. I thought he was an absolutely terrible Star Trek scriptwriter. And I was really disappointed in the fact that all of these concepts that were brought up in Picard were just dealt with in the most cursory fashion. I even found the to be honest, I found what happened to the Borg, the poor Borg, the people who were completely victimized by having your identity stripped away. What they did with the Borg and the way they treated humanoid life in Picard, just in general, was abhorrent. And it was I think that's the thing that I hated most about Picard is how they treated humanoid life. The callousness. You know, Space Legolas would also have been taught compassion. And the idea that he wouldn't, the fellow Romulan, just because he might have gone after Picard, you cut his head off. I mean, what kind of order is that? And that's not always, I mean, read some Sun Tzu, man. Sometimes perhaps that's not the best course of action. You cut off some dude's head and then the entire community's against you. How is that a good thing? Where's your warrior philosophy and your understanding? I mean, that's, to me, the most, I think, dangerous course of behavior. But anyway, dirty nerdy, you might be right about that. Well, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, Dying Time is not here, as Dr. Dealgood would say in Mad Max Beyond Thunderdome. But I love Dr. Dealgood. Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, Dying Time's here. I love that shit. Anyway, sorry for saying fuck a lot in this episode. I apologize. But I want to thank you all for being here. Thanks for being members of the Post-Geek Singularity community. This brings an end to Robservations episode number 377. John Campea right now is still doing his watch-along of Avengers Infinity War. You can go jump in. He's having a Netflix party right now. I think it started at 1, so you can still catch the last 45 minutes of the movie. I want to thank you all for being here. Thank you for being imagination connoisseurs and members of the Post-Geek Singularity par excellence. So I'll see you tomorrow on John's show. I will see you tonight on Whining About Movies with the lovely Elizabeth. Whining About Movies, episode number 8. We are going to delve into Billy Wilder's 1944 supreme example of film noir, Double Indemnity, co-written by Raymond Chandler and based on a novella by the man who wrote The Postman Always Rings Twice. Anyway, fantastic. Join us tonight at 8. I'll be back on the John Campea show tomorrow morning. I'll be back here tomorrow afternoon with another scintillating episode. I want to thank my moderating staff. First of all, Detective Jim Boyers, Mike Bodden, of course, Greg Smith, Jordy Lyons, and Lewis Yu for being great moderators and making this channel the fun destination spot that it is. If you like these chats, please hit like. If you haven't subscribed yet, please subscribe. I have noticed, by the way, that my shows have not been being found lately. And I don't know if it's shadow banning or what, but they don't always show up in people's feeds. You might want to hit the notification button. If you like these chats, do hit like. It's very odd. I haven't been able to find my shows right away on my channel after they've aired. I'm like, what? Anyway, it sort of happened. It's good for the channel, you know. So if you like and subscribe, maybe that's a problem. But who knows? I don't quite know how analytics are working in these crazy times. But anyway, thanks for being here. And remember, oh wait, you know what I've liked doing? Actually, people have actually mentioned they like me doing this too. Is when I sign out, I go into the wide shot where I can go, look, here we're in the Robservatory. Well, ladies and gentlemen, gentle beings, kind people from across the universe, you don't have to be binary to watch my show. Anybody is welcome. However you want to think of yourself, you can, as long as you're all socially distancing and staying safe, because I want to see you here after these times of tribulation. Trials and tribulations have passed. Anyway, the tribulations are happening. They're happening. There's tribulations out there, ladies and gentlemen. So remember, every person you meet has a story to tell you have yet to hear. And all you have to do is listen. And by the way, I want to particularly thank everybody that keeps writing in about Star Trek Picard. I said I wasn't going to talk about it, but you guys, you just warm my little heart. And with that, I say, at least until 8 o'clock tonight, in episode 8 of Whining About Movies, have a better day. And as I keep saying, I mean that.